Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for popping by today. In this video, I'm going to show you how I created this snow globe shaker tag ornament. Now, this is a die that is intended to stay open, but I chose to close it up and turn it into a shaker tag. Now, I've got everything sped up 2 times, so some of my hand gestures might be a little bit odd, but I wanted to keep this video from being too long. So I've got most of my pieces already die cut. I'm just going to die cut this piece here. It is intended to be the back, and the bottom goes under, folds under, and then folds around the front. I am actually going to cut the bottom part off, and I'm going to also cut the tag or the tab off of each one of the layers as well, so that I can just use my foam tape and the thickness of the foam tape in the different layers to dictate how thick my tag is. If I were to use the bottom that is on this die, I would end up having a tag that's really thick, and I don't want that. So I'm just cutting off the bottom piece. I'm using a little piece of tape on my mini trimmer here in order to mark out how tall it is on the back, and then I will cut all of them to the same size so that I have even bottoms on all of them. And I just do that with all 4 pieces to make sure that they are all the same. I have 4 different die sets here that I am using to create this ornament tag, but you could use less than that and flip some of them over just to have the hills a little bit different. Each one of these has different characters with them. Some I'm using, some I'm not. The background has a few different ones that I'm not using. The Santa and sleigh that are on this card are included in one of the sets. The snowmen on the front are included in one, and the house die is also included in one. So I'm using all the pieces from the different die sets to create this background. First thing I'm doing is ink blending a background here. I've got Saltwater taffy, I've got wilted violet, and Uncharted marinere, and I'm just using blending brushes to blend a beautiful sky in the background. In the end, you actually don't see the Saltwater taffy, so you could either blend it higher so that it was visible, or just leave it out altogether. I wasn't really paying enough attention when I was doing this to notice that my hills were actually going to cover it up and you wouldn't actually see it. So if I were to do it again, I would make sure to have that Saltwater taffy higher so that it was a bit more visible. So I went from the Saltwater taffy to the wilted violet to the Uncharted mariner, and now I'm just going back, making sure that I've got lots of ink on that background and making sure that the colors blend really well between each of them. Now this background, the die itself cuts this section out of the tag, and I want them to be fused together. I want it to be a nice solid back for my tag ornament. So I'm just taking a piece of cardstock. I'm going to glue both of these pieces back together onto that cardstock piece, and I'm just going to set that aside so that it can dry completely while I'm coloring other parts of this piece. That way I've got a nice solid backing for this piece, and it doesn't have the part cut out. As an alternative, because this piece cuts out and I'm ending up gluing it together anyways, you could take one of your other pieces, trace it on a piece of cardstock, and cut it out. It's just for the background, so you wouldn't actually see the penciled lines, and it would save you having to have 4 dies. You'd only use 3 from what I'm using here. So now what I'm doing is I'm using some die tape to just tape off parts of my piece here, and I'm inking my trees green. I'm not making them a solid green. I'm just making a little bit of green, mostly towards the bottom, so that the tops of the trees are a little bit lighter, but I just want them to have a little bit of color to them and not be stark white. So I'm just doing that to each one of them. The tape I'm reusing over and over again. There's no need to get new tape each time. And I'm just trying to make sure to keep my frame as pristine as possible. Some parts of the frame you're not going to see, but the hill part you're definitely still going to see. So I want to make sure that that is protected when I'm doing that ink blending. I want to make sure to clean my surface between each of the ink blendings, just because some of that residue, ink residue, gets on your mat, and because I'm using a black mat, you actually can't see it. So better to have, or to clean between the colors and not get ink transferred as we're going. So right now I'm using some pumice stone and just doing a little bit of light ink blending on the bottom of those clouds, and then the little smoky piece from the house, just turning that a little bit gray as well. I also have the other pieces to the house. There's a background piece and a piece that has windows that pop out, popping out all of those pieces to the windows. The background piece I'm going to ink with scattered straw so that it looks like there's some light glowing from inside of the house. And then the house itself I'm going to ink with, what is it that I use? Candied apple. Give it a nice red color. It'll be a nice pop of red, and it'll tie into the red that I'm going to use on the snowman scarf. And there's a couple other places that I use a bit of red. Just have those tie in together. I'm going to glue the front part of the house to the back part of the house. And then I'm just going to take a Copic marker and I'm going to color the door a different color. I want that to stand out a little bit more, but because the piece is so tiny, it's hard to ink blend that area. So a marker is the solution. I'm using Copic just because they happen to be sitting on my desk, but you could use a Tombow marker, an alternative marker, just whatever you want to color that piece. I'm going to glue the smoke on there and set those pieces aside to dry. There's also a little snow rooftop piece that I will put on in a moment once that has had a chance to dry. The little snowmen, there's 3 snowmen that get die cut in this piece here. I'm just using markers to color the different pieces to that. So I use black for the hat, brown for the stick arms, and then I'm going to use the red for the scarf. These pieces are a lot easier to color while they're stuck in the paper. If they happen to fall out, you can color them with them out, but because they stayed in there, it's just easier to color this way. I used a little bit of orange there for a carrot nose, and then I'm going to use the black for the eyes and the little buttons. And once that is done, I'm just going to pop all those pieces out and glue them all together. That way they can sit and they can dry while I'm putting the rest of the pieces together. So the little tiny snowman, because he's so tiny, the hats that came with those dies were really way too big for him. So I end up just using some stickles to just kind of give him a faux hat. Right there, I'm gluing on the scarf, and then next I'm going to glue on the little top hat. It's a little harder to see because it's a black top hat on top of the black mat. So I just use a little bit of red stickles for the brim of the top hat and for the little tiny snowman's hat. So my background has completely dried, so I'm just going to cut around the edge of my die cut there to remove that background. And we are just about ready to start putting our card together. So I'm going to take some thin double-sided tape, and this is my front piece. I'm going to glue in the acetate for the front of our shaker card. You definitely want acetate because you want to be able to see through it. If you have some old packaging from something that's not scratched or anything, you could use that as your shaker front as well. You just want something that's nice and clean and clear without a lot of scratches. So there's no dye for this, so I'm just gluing it right down to the piece of acetate, and I'm just using some scissors to cut that out to get it nice and precise. When you're putting your tape down, you're going to have some buckles and some folds in that tape. It doesn't affect the taping at all, so we're good to go. So that front little bit that I'm gluing down right now, it actually is a piece from the back that was cut off. It's meant to fold around and fold to the front and then use as kind of a little hill in attaching everything. I just decided to glue it to the front and have it as an extra hill. And I'm also gluing down my snowman so that that glue can be drying while I'm putting the rest of the card together. It really takes no time at all to do this and have it set aside to be ready. So for this back piece, I'm taking the second layer, I'm flipping it over, and I'm going to use some narrow foam tape to go around all of the edges. I'm also going to make sure to do it right below the hill piece to support that, as well as to make sure that when I put my shaker bits in, they don't all fall behind the hill areas. I want to still have them visible. My tape isn't going all the way to the edge. It's going just slightly in, and any of those extra bits that I'm cutting off, I'm just using them behind that solid part on the bottom just to help support that, and that way that tape doesn't go to waste, as well as not having a bunch of joins in the next part that I'm taping. The foam tape that I'm using is probably about 1/8 of an inch. It's fairly narrow, and it's really quite easy to curve around edges and stuff like that. Once you have your tape in all your areas, just take off the backing paper and we can glue it onto the back of our shaker tag. And this process I'm going to repeat with every single layer. Before adding the next layer, I'm going to add one of our cloud pieces. I'm choosing the bigger one to add first, putting a little bit of Distress Collage medium over the part that's going to cover the curve, or that's going to be on the curve of the shaker tag. And now we're going to add the foam tape to the backing of the piece, following the same procedure that I did to the first layer. Once again, once you've got all of the adhesive over the back, take the backing off and then match it to your layers below and attach it, making sure to press on all of the areas to make sure that that tape is snug and is holding in place. Now I have a little gold string that I looped and tied. I want to put some double-sided tape down and to attach that in place. I want to have that hanger in between the layers of foam and die cuts. So after I have that down, I'm just going to put the other cloud piece, this is the smaller of the two, and glue that down with some Distress Collage medium as well. I'm just using an acrylic block and a jar with some glass beads in it, and that's going to hold it in place while I'm working on the next piece. I realized I forgot to add my house, so I put a little bit of glue on the bottom of the house and behind the smoke, the part that was going to touch the clouds, just to make sure that that was attached well. Now it's time to put the foam tape on my top layer. Now before that top layer gets actually glued down to the front of the card, you want to add your shaker bits in. If you glue this piece down first, you're not going to have any possible way of adding the shaker bit. So don't actually put this down until you've added your little bits in there. So once again, before putting that front piece on, I'm adding my shaker bits. I just have a bunch of different little bits and pieces, some star sequins, some snowflake punches that I've punched out of some scrap cardstock. It's holographic scrap cardstock that I had that I punched a bunch of snowflakes out. I tend to collect little jars of things and use a combination of a bunch of different ones in this. I'm also adding some mica flakes in there. They have just a really nice sparkle and a nice organic look to them. And now we can add the front piece. Make sure once again to press down and make sure all the adhesive is stuck down before you shake your card. Otherwise you might have little bits popping out of pieces that haven't stuck. That actually happened to me, so don't do it, because once you've got little bits coming out, they're going to stick to the adhesive and you're not going to be able to glue it down. So my Santa and sleigh I just glued on there. I'm just putting a acrylic block to hold it down while I'm adding a little bit of stickles to the bottom to the hills. I'm also going to add a red stickle nose and hat to Santa, and I'm also going to take a gold gel pen and just put some details in that sleigh as well as the reins. Now to use this as a tag, I would write a message on the back of the ornament so that it wouldn't affect anything on the front, but you could also just hang it on the tree as just an ornament. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.